Hello and welcome to the Woman Show. I'm Lenina Rasool, and today we are speaking about female entrepreneurship, or more specifically, investment in female startups and women-owned businesses. Now, we know that the investment in women's businesses are very, very low. In the US, it's been recorded at around 1%, in Europe at around 2%. And today we're going to be speaking about a new term that is emerging called gender lens investing. Now, I am not the expert. After the break, we're going to be speaking to someone who's going to explain this term to us. But before that, we're going to have a look at a short video around gender lens investing to give us some context to start that conversation. Let's have a look.
We are living in a space where everything is connected.
Tech is growing and tech is not going anywhere.
And as you know that digital marketing and digital thing, they move fast.
You can't stay in one place. You have to move, you have to change, you have to enhance.
We know that we have to be digital nowadays. If you don't do it, you die.
One of the biggest risks is that organizations, and especially small and growing businesses, are going to be outdated and basically out of the sight of different customers and markets.
And so we cannot simply just change, we can't just transition and expect everybody to be at that level. We need to work backwards and support people to build their digital skills in order to keep up with the progress of the digital economy and digital services moving forwards.
So we need to look at and think about, as we're looking at these digitalization opportunities, is it really equal access, and are we being very inclusive, and are we really addressing the problems that we came to solve and doing it in a cost-effective way?
I think that together will help to strengthen the entrepreneurial ecosystem, especially in the developing economies where maybe access was not prominent in the first place.
It's fantastic because we are breaking boundaries, and the creativity is not in one organization, or it's not located in just one person. The creativity, it's among the ecosystem.
So ANDE is really providing the glue to bring the community together, help explore, help learn around what is working, what the challenges are, and then really looking at more tailored solutions.
So being able to better serve and close the gap in gender equality, to also better serve small and growing businesses and intermediaries working in climate action, and definitely to create more access to quality jobs and to economic opportunities for all the small and growing businesses.
In today's world, digitalization is not a luxury but a necessity, and at the end benefits everybody, especially poor and vulnerable communities such as micro-entrepreneurs or smallholder farmers.
A journey of 1,000 miles, they say, begins with a single step, and that step has already begun. So we are hoping that this gap can be bridged and everybody can be included in the digital transformation.
It's a long way to go, but we have a really huge momentum for digital transformation.
That was a short video on gender lens investing. We are going to take a short break, but we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. You are still watching The Woman Show, and we are speaking about female entrepreneurship, but more especially about the investment in female-owned startups and businesses. And joining me in studio to speak about this is Sekai Chiwandamira. She is with the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs, and they have been doing some exciting work around gender equality in business. Sekai, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Lenina.
So, Sekai, just to jump sort of straight in, there's been a lot of narrative over the last few years about the very low investment in female businesses. And I think in the US, it's about 1%. In Europe, it's about 2%. And I wanted us to just sort of look at what is the situation in South Africa or across the continent here, and also, can you please just give us a little bit more about what you do?
Thank you very much, Lenina, for having me. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. By way of introduction, my name is Sekai Chiwandamira, and I am the chapter head for ANDE, which is known as the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs. Essentially, we are a global network of organizations that are really seeking to propel and develop entrepreneurship in developing economies. So, in answering your question, Yelena, I would like to look at it from a global but also a regional perspective. Gender lens investing has gained a lot of momentum, not only globally but also locally in South Africa. Many tend to define gender lens investing as the deliberate incorporation of gender factors into the investment analysis and decisions, which ultimately improve both the social and business outcomes. That's essentially what gender lens investing is. Now, speaking to some of the points that you have made mention of, what we have realized is that it's very difficult to get an accurate number on the African continent. And that's simply because when it comes to research, there isn't a lot of data. But in terms of the last information that we were able to extract, it's been estimated, and this is since 2018, that as little as 4.5% of venture capital funding went to female-founded startups. That is very minimal, Lenina. Now, when it comes to Black women, the numbers are even more dire. Less than 0.2% of all early stage venture funding has gone to Black women, meaning that you and I are at a very low risk of obviously being able to tap into that funding if we wanted to venture into women entrepreneurship.
Wow, Sekai, that is very low. I mean, both of those figures. And, if I may ask you, so one of the things that why I wanted to speak about sort of the low funding is to look at this issue from a systemic perspective. And I'll say that I wanted, female entrepreneurs, I speak to them all the time. I've had them on the show. We've spoken about this issue. It is really difficult to get funding. But the narrative often that we are given through lots of, especially the books and mainstream media, is to keep going, keep hustling, and women also tend to sort of just feel often that we're not doing things the right way, right? So we need to just, I've done something wrong. I didn't get the funding because I'm doing it wrong. And this often also scares off new entrepreneurs. But I don't know if it's possible for you to put into context, like, what does this mean? 0.2% of businesses do not get funding. How do we think about that as female entrepreneurs who want to start a business?
Yeah, so when you're looking at that 0.2%, I mean, it's less than 1%, which is very, very minuscule. What the 0.2% is basically saying is that when it comes to funding, there is still a lot that needs to be done within the ecosystem. I always like to look at it from a supply and demand perspective, right? We have a lot more women entrepreneurs, Lenina, across the African continent, even in South Africa, but we don't have a lot of funds that can invest in these women entrepreneurs. If I bring this closer to home, how many women-led investment funds do we have in South Africa? It's probably less than 20, if I can be very honest with you, right? How many funds are dedicated towards investing in women? So have a gender lens component to the investment mandate. It's very minuscule. Now, this is why for us, we are always trying to advocate that when you're looking at women entrepreneurship, it's not just about setting up and developing a conducive environment that supports women entrepreneurship, but it's also looking at other factors such as funding, factors relating to policies Do our policies actually allow for funding to come in? I work for an organization that disperses a lot of grants. Believe it or not, I would say more than 50% of the funding that we receive at ANDE in the form of grants, which we obviously have to disperse to intermediary support organizations or women entrepreneurs, comes from overseas. And for me, I always sit there and I think, what can we do to ensure that I can knock on the doors of investors or FDIs in South Africa and ask them for more funding? So clearly, there seems to be a bit of a disconnect between the number of women entrepreneurs that are out there, but also the funding. And I think the last point that I really wanted to make mention of is the fact that with funding, often at times women entrepreneurs tend to look at just grants in particular. We don't, as women entrepreneurs, look at debt or equity. And what we found as a network organization is that there is a dearth of knowledge, information. So a lot of women entrepreneurs just do not know how to access that funding, where to find the information relating to the funding that is out there, but also how to go about applying for the funding and being investor ready.
I love that you brought that up, a knowledge gap. You know, it's why we have the show. So I'm going to ask you a silly question, which for me I felt like it was a silly question when I was trying to research it. If we were looking at the grants, so a lot of women apply for grants, and that's sort of, you know, a comfortable space that we see we can fit into. But when you're talking about debt or equity, what I also wanted to understand is when we think about investing or venture capital, again, what I found is that there is a misunderstanding of exactly what that is. And I'll tell you, my baseline knowledge is sort of like someone's buying shares in my company, if I have a company. Do you mind just giving us like a short overview in terms of what that difference is between grants and venture capital or a financial investment?
Okay, great. So with a grant, basically, if I disperse a grant to a woman entrepreneur, there's nothing that I am requiring. I'm going to just put this in simple layman's terms,
please.
if you don't mind, Lenina. So you don't have to pay back any interest. You're not really taking out a loan. There's really no financial obligation on the part of the woman entrepreneur. Now, when you move towards debt and equity and venture capital, you're really looking at a funder or an investor investing into your business. But of course, there is a financial return element to it. That's the first thing. Secondly, you most likely, depending on which financial instrument you're going for, you might have to, provide shares. You might have to pay back some money. There might be some interest that is attached to it. So that's very different. And I think, speaking to that point, what we have found, and a lot of research really alludes to this point, women are not really interested in debt and equity. They are scared of taking up debt and equity. So when it comes to the various financial instruments, they would really prefer looking for grants. Now, if I look at South Africa, currently as things stand, and I'm talking about your financial, your foreign direct investments, it's decreased substantially over the years. In fact, it started decreasing before the pandemic started, meaning that a lot of the grants that we used to get are no longer available. And this is why, as women entrepreneurs, you really need to look at increasing your risk level. It's really about risk and your appetite for risk and being able to take that bold step and approaching funders that will possibly afford you with a debt or equity or venture funding opportunity.
Thank you. I mean, that was great. And in layman's terms, I totally get it. And I love that you mentioned that women, when you're speaking about the risk profile, because women are, And that's also an intersectional thing. A lot of female entrepreneurs have children. They have like these sort of, they're heads of households. So they have these baseline costs that they really cannot risk. And so it makes sense that they sort of taking less risk. I do want to ask you, so one of the things I came across when I was doing some research was that when women do pitch sort of for investing, some research has shown that there's a different way, there are different ways in which they are treated or viewed, or there's different gendered perceptions about female entrepreneurs. So one thing that stood out for me is that often men are asked about facts and figures and women are asked about family and how they're going to sort of balance the responsibilities. And, the fact that that is sort of still happening and maybe it's not that blatant. Although I have heard stories in as recently as last year across different sectors. Is that something that you have come across, have heard about as you've worked with entrepreneurs?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, I think this is really an issue that speaks to unconscious bias. As a woman entrepreneur, why should you attend a pitching event and the investors sitting across the table ask you about family? And as a male entrepreneur, they're asking you a completely different question. And I think for me, it's really around the systemic issues that we made mention of earlier on. That, when it comes to investments and funding into women entrepreneurs, we're really looking at root causes of those systemic issues. And those systemic issues are really talking to the fact that often at times, first of all, our male founders, they just don't know how to relate to the women entrepreneurs, right? So it's easier for them to ask you about your family or about your children or about the softer issues. Whereas with your female entrepreneurs and female founders, it's a different question. Now, what we have found, and this is very interesting, especially on the panels that I have sat on, with the investment pitches, I think often at times as women as well, we don't want to think like a man, if I can put it that way. So I will attend a pitching event and I'll bring the feminine side to me, right? And with that feminine side, you're expecting that the judges or the investors are going to sympathize with you. And that's actually not the case, Lenina. For me, it's really about we should level the playing fields. See me as an entrepreneur before you see me as a woman or as a man or a male. And so what we have found is often at times, and it's quite a sad reality, we've had women entrepreneurs come and pitch to us, and they will start talking about the families and they'll start talking about their children. And I sit there and I say to them, we're not interested in that. We're interested in hearing about your business. We're interested in hearing about the impact that your business is going to have on society, but also I'm interested in the financial return. So speak to me about that. But of course, because I'm a female, I can resonate with that. But the challenge is that with a male, we can't. And I think it also then touches on the point of also confidence, Lenina. We have found, and a lot of research also suggests that one of the key barriers and obstacles for funding, which a lot of women entrepreneurs cite, relates to their confidence. So, they really bring in that feminine side of theirs and not that outer male ego, and confidence as well that is required. And that's really what is affecting them. That's really what has affected, even from my perspective, a lot of women accessing those funds. You need to have that confidence, but also set aside the fact that you are a woman. Focus on the fact that you are an entrepreneur who has come up with innovative solutions to address real life challenges that we're experiencing in the ecosystem.
I love that you said see me as an entrepreneur before you see me as a woman. But it's really interesting because in order to take a gendered lens, you almost have to, part of taking the gendered lens is taking the gender out of it, and just
Exactly.
seeing this person and making the business case. I just want to ask you, Sekai, because what became interesting, you're speaking about confidence and then you're speaking sort of about finances. And what I've also found, and earlier we spoke about risk, which is related to finances. Do you think also that there's a knowledge gap in terms of how the finances work, about whether they really understand, the understanding of profits and loss? And again, these are topics which sort of, when you try to understand the ecosystem, become very complicated or can become very complicated.
Yes, definitely. I think it starts with knowledge. If you don't have the knowledge, then you are never going to be able to access that capital, access those markets, but also most importantly, grow your business. So what we have found is that there's not a lot of information sharing that is taking place. You often have to scramble to look for that information. I think this is why within the ecosystem, all ecosystem actors are always advocating for the need to have platforms, but also organizations that can share more information just around funding. Let's talk about a woman-led business or a woman-owned business that is based in the rural economy or township economy. Where do we expect them to find information? How do we expect them to tap into that information? How do we expect them to come into contact with funders, right? I'm talking about networking, for example, in this case. How do we expect them to be able to access markets outside of the specific township area that they are supporting or rural area that they are supporting? How do we expect them to tap into the supply chains locally in South Africa and obviously outside? It all requires information. And I think for us as ecosystem actors, there's a role that we need to play. And I'm talking about the public sector and the private sector and research academia as well. For starters, the public sector has to make sure that any programs that they have and even incentives, they publish them and ensure that they can reach even the person who is sitting in the most remote area in South Africa as a starting point. Secondly, with the private sector, we need to ensure that when you're looking at enterprise supplier development, women have access to that information of how they can tap into it. Often at times, you'll find women entrepreneurs telling you that, oh, I didn't know that this opportunity existed, or that there were these incubation or accelerator programs, right? And then you sit there and you think, but how could you not know? Then you realize, well, actually, for starters, maybe she didn't know how to access that information, where to find that information. And I think, this is why it's important that information is imparted, but also knowledge is shared within the ecosystem. And we stop acting in silos. And I think, also for investors, when you do have a fund that you have established and you want to reach out to women entrepreneurs, make sure that you're doing everything possible to ensure that that investment fund has been published, first of all, but is also made public to the relevant women entrepreneurs.
Thank you, Sekai. Sorry, we need to take a quick break. I mean, I love what you're saying. And I think not just a lot of people publish it, but without a focus on distribution and making sure it's getting to the target sort of audience. But we need to take a quick break. We'll carry on this conversation after this. Welcome back. You are still watching The Woman Show, and we are speaking about female entrepreneurship and more specifically investment in female startups and businesses. And I am chatting to Sekai Chiwandamira from the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs. And Sekai, before the break, we were speaking quite a lot about what investment is and about gender lens investment, this new term about investing sort of from a gendered perspective. And I think we want to move a little bit more into that now. So you work with the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs, and recently there was this great partnership with another business or organization called Value for Women that work to bring sort of the gender lens investing to a few countries, including South Africa. So I want to ask you a little bit more about what does that look like? What is this gender lens investing framework?
Great. So I think let me start off by saying that at its very core, gender lens investing is all about seeking to close the gender gap.
Mm-hmm.
Now, according to the African Development Bank, it is estimated that approximately 42 billion US dollars, which is about 678 billion rands, is the financing gap which exists for African women. Now, this is startling considering that Africa has the highest rate of entrepreneurship in the world and is also the only continent in which women account for the majority of entrepreneurs. Now, realizing this challenge and identifying this gap, it's obviously become a priority for both ANDE as well as the Value for Women, who decided last year to collaborate and develop and share best practices for gender-smart support interventions in the ecosystem. With generous support from the Walmart Foundation, both organizations partnered in Central America, Mexico, and South Africa on a very exciting project, which is entitled as the Partnership for Sustainable and Inclusive Small and Growing Businesses. And now, speaking to some of the earlier points that we made mention of, we really wanted to ensure that, first of all, we support entrepreneurial intermediaries as well as investors with the technical assistance to improve their service for women-led and gender-inclusive businesses. Second, we wanted to also support small and growing businesses, both women-led and gender-inclusive, in the adoption of their gender strategies, action plans, and tools to impact both the business and social outcomes. And then the third component was to develop and share best practices and methodologies on applying a gender lens to entrepreneurial support, and most importantly, to share these lessons throughout the ecosystem. So now when it comes to applying gender lens investing, I believe that there is no one-size-fits-all approach because the needs of the investors vary and the ecosystems within which they are funding are different. In addition, I think it's important for us to change our mindsets about gender lens investing. It shouldn't be seen as a nice to do or a nice to have, or even a tick box exercise because of compliance with triple BE, but it should be seen as us trying to address this gender gap, but also effectively contribute towards economic development and also unlock the economic power of the majority of entrepreneurs that are women. Now, there are various ways in which investors can apply gender lens investing to their work. But to close in response to your question, Lena, I wanted to mention 5. The first one is really we need to develop actions and processes that intentionally invest in businesses as well as societal solutions that are founded by, led by, and owned by women. That's very simple. Secondly, the investors need to prioritize gender-based factors across the whole investment spectrum to advance gender equality, gender equity, and gender parity, but also to ensure that it's going to inform in a better way their investment decisions. Then, thirdly, The funds and investors should put their money where their mouth is by proactively responding to the social needs, diversity, equity, and inclusion, but most importantly, this gender gap at a granular level. So, what I'm talking about is that it needs to start with the funders and investors' internal structures. So, internally, and then expand externally through their investments. So, here I'm really talking about the business model. Then, the fourth way is really to ensure that financial institutions take demand issues seriously by providing financial products and services that seek to close the gender gap. And then, last but not least, this is something that is often neglected but should be a top priority for any organization, especially in the private sector. Companies need to provide the necessary value chain support and opportunities to women entrepreneurs and women owned businesses.
Thank you, Sekai. That was a mouthful, but they were all so relevant. I was thinking about, as you were speaking and we were talking about sort of what does this gender lens look like in practicality. And there was as I was researching for this specific episode and trying to understand the gender lens investing myself, I came across this video on YouTube, and it was about, something separate, but it resonated with me. It was about a construction company that was trying to sort of attract female construction workers as well, but they just weren't applying. And they couldn't understand. What they eventually went to do was go and ask women in the area, why are you not taking advantage of this job opportunity? And what came out was toilets. There are no toilets. So they hadn't had portable toilets even for the men. Men were just sort of, going where they could go. But for me, this was such a powerful example because it was such a simple thing. They had nowhere to go to the toilet. And yet, for me, it was an example of when they were sitting down and sort of forming, it could be an action plan or a strategy to say, hey, we'd like to increase sort of, females within this construction project. They hadn't thought about what specifically those females need to be able to engage with that work. And so just using that as sort of a practical analogy, is that some of the things that you would say investors need to do when you're mentioning things like, first, look within your own company. Are there ways in which it's not catering towards gender equity? When you're thinking about the female entrepreneurs, yes, we need to look at them as entrepreneurs before we look at them as women. But it's also, it's intersectional. It's also understanding that that there are those intersectional issues around, I don't know, I want to throw out childcare and all of the other things, but maybe you could just give us some ideas about what the shift in thinking needs to be when we start to try to shift the gender lens investing.
So, speaking to what you came across in the construction sector, I think it's a very sad reality for many women. But also, this confirms some of the facts and statistics that are out there, which basically suggest that at least 2.4 billion women of working age are not afforded equal opportunity, and 178 countries continue to maintain legal barriers that prevent women from their full economic participation. And you're more than welcome to look at the World Bank's Women, Business and the Law 2022 report for that. Now, when you're looking at gender lens investing, you're really looking at putting on that lens. And, I want to use the analogy of the lens because, yes, as is evident, I'm actually wearing on glasses. So before I got my glasses, the optometrist said something that stuck with me. And I want to use that analogy when it comes to gender lens investing. And she said to me, Sekai, when it comes to lenses, it's all about finding the perfect pair of glasses for your face shape, but also about balancing proportions. Now, what I'm trying to say is that the same applies when we apply that lens to gender lens investing. In this case, the balancing proportion is taking into account various gender-based factors that span across the investment process, but also that relates to how can you better inform your investment decisions ultimately. Now, the lens that we're talking about is really about, first of all, the provision of capital. Secondly, we're looking at the investment process, right? How do we mitigate gender biases? How do we deal with the issues of unconscious biases, but also identify opportunities which look at women empowerment? And then thirdly, how do we ensure that there's gender diversity in the firm? So how are we going to advance that gender diversity? How are we going to promote investment opportunities to ensure that women are going to be empowered? Now, what I found intriguing last week when I attended the Global Startup Awards Africa, which was a fantastic summit, and this was some of the insights that were shared in the panel discussions that was focused on the future of funding and gender lens investing in Africa. A lot of the panelists placed emphasis on the importance of applying a gender lens on the pre-investment activities. So not the investment activities as they've already proceeded. We're talking about the sourcing phase. We're talking about the due diligence phase. We're talking about, ensuring that those women entrepreneurs are investor ready. But also, I think, in my opinion, it extends to not only just the pre-investment phase, but also we need to ensure that gender lens investing is incorporated all the way to the post-deal monitoring. And this is why we need to ensure that female entrepreneurs are ready, investor ready, but that we also have a bankable pipeline. The sad reality is often at times we only focus on one segment of that investment process. And that's where we want to apply the gender lens, right? But we're not even looking at the post-investment process, which is also the monitoring and evaluation, the metrics that we're using. How do we actually go and report and say that, we have supported a woman-led business? These are the number of jobs that have been created. This is the role that we're playing towards economic development. We're not even looking at how we design the necessary impact metrics and impact frameworks, but also ensuring that assurance and some sort of monitoring, evaluation, impact measurement, and management is also incorporating gender lens investing.
I think that's great. And I think that, what that would add an extra boost. And I think that's great also for women, for females out there and for entrepreneurs out there to hear that. Because, I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, investing to me on the one side was trying to understand what it is. But on the other side, I think when we speak again about the risk and being risk averse, when we think of it as debt, it seems very punitive, whereas very straight-laced and punitive, and you default and you're out and you've just, when actually there are so many different elements to this and there's so many different elements to the measuring that, yes, investors should be doing, but us also. I just want to ask you also, when we talk about sort of the post-deal monitoring and we come back to sort of information gaps, I think also, aspects of mentoring are really important when you look at how women have historically been excluded from this knowledge, if I may just put it that way. We're afraid of sort of the money ecosystem because we haven't been exposed to the money ecosystem for generations. And do you sort of encourage that exchange of knowledge also?
Yes, definitely. That exchange of knowledge needs to begin at the very beginning. So from all the way from the sourcing phase up until even the end of that deal. Now, I think there's power in impact storytelling, Lanina, and this is what we've always encouraged women entrepreneurs in the masterclasses that we have led. Once a funder has invested in your business, it's not just about the monetary or financial contribution, but it's also about telling the story. It's also about demonstrating the impact that that investment has had on your business, but also sharing that information is going to unlock other funding opportunities, right? And I think it's very important that it just does not stop. Information sharing needs to continue on a regular basis. And I think often at times, this is why we struggle to find data, because we don't share that information and we're not even able to map the impact of some of these deals, but also how many entrepreneurs have been even supported. So it's very, very important.
Sekai, we are almost out of time. So my last question is going to be some advice. And I think I'd love if you had some just nuggets of wisdom in terms of where to start for investors who are out there who might be watching, but also whatever you can bring to female entrepreneurs, startups, women out there thinking about starting up. Any nuggets of gold?
Yeah, so I would say the first nugget is to any woman entrepreneur and any female investor: do not be scared of challenging the status quo. We need more female investors. We need more women-led businesses, owned businesses, but businesses that are moving and that are scaling and that are growing. So please do not be scared of doing that. Also, I think it's important that on a day-to-day basis, we continue to promote investments and effective support services for the women-led businesses in our country. Secondly, we need to continue within our organizations and businesses as well to improve gender-inclusive employment policies, especially within the sector that we're operating in. And I'm really looking at us increasing the development of women in leadership roles, but also providing gender-sensitive policies for employees at all levels. And then thirdly, we need to scale gender-focused business models through the woman-led, woman-owned, and woman-founded businesses, and ensure that we are integrating them into the corporate supply chains or distribution channels, and also providing goods and services that are beneficial to women and girls. So I think really as an ecosystem, there's a lot that we can do. And I applaud the Cape Town TV for fantastic programs such as this, because I think this is a step in the right direction. But also, I think there's a lot that we need to do as individuals, but also as organizations. So I wish each and every woman entrepreneur out there the very best, but also with anyone who's looking at wanting to start up a gender lens investment fund, go for it. You are definitely contributing towards closing the gender gap and also contributing towards economic growth and development.
Sekai, thank you so very much. I mean, I feel like I have learned so much in this short conversation, and I'm sure many others out there have. Just to reiterate, women need to go and challenge the status quo. I mean, that made my heart jump. So we are going to do that. I want to thank you so very much for your time and for sharing with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lena, for having me.
And we are going to take a short break, but we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. You're still watching The Woman Show, and we've been speaking about female entrepreneurship and gender lens investing. Now, to round off this amazing conversation we've had, we're going to have a look at a short video where female entrepreneurs are offering tips for other female entrepreneurs. Let's hear what they have to say.
So what would my advice be to women entrepreneurs? Is really build your tribe actively. intentionally your networks. Sometimes, we don't participate in a lot of things that actively build your networks. I think it's really important because there are people who can support you, there are people who can connect you, but sometimes we have to actively, consciously keep building. And as you go through your journey, you've got to do it. And the last thing I want to say is that you deserve capital, and you deserve the resources to grow your business, but you have to find the right one for you and your ambitions. So raise capital that really fits your goals, whatever it may be. Whether you want to stay small, whether you want to be a unicorn, whether you want to be a legacy business, it's your choice. And there is capital and support out there for you. So find that, and there are lots of us who can help you as much as we can.
A tip for women entrepreneurs. I decided to, instead of saying what my tip would be, to share with you what the experienced women entrepreneurs had as tips in our webinar. So the first one is believe in yourself before others do. You heard a lot of stories of women that were told over and over again that they would not succeed. So this is an important one. Plan and persist. Delivery builds trust. Invest in your team and learn from them. You cannot do it alone. Do the balancing act and let unimportant things go. So this is really about the care burden at home versus the time you spend on your business. Make sure you set priorities. And then last but not least, network and share with others. So I think that aligns very well with what's already been said. Make sure that you build your network and leverage that.
Our recommendations for entrepreneurs would be to really focus on creating a gender-forward business model, because we see this as improving your chances of tapping into the funding that's available from the GLI investors, or those with an interest in gender. And this is a subset of investors that we see growing in number by the day. So how we recommend going about this? We'd say start with creating a formal gender strategy and an action plan. Integrate a gender lens throughout different operational areas in your business. Look at sales, marketing, customer care, etc. In order to achieve better gender inclusion outcomes. And any strategies that you choose to implement should be based on rigorous collection of sex disaggregated data. Not just on the workforce, but also your clients and your value chain actors. So that you're able to correctly identify the problem and the gender angle of the business challenge.
Recommendation I would have so many, but I think absolute first and foremost would be ensuring you have financial records in place. And again, that sounds really, I guess, general, but it's probably been the absolute biggest barrier that we've faced as facilitators of this program and as supporters of entrepreneurs in Cambodia, is actually helping them to understand that, why they would need to have these things in place, how to get a professional system in place, how to reconcile finances, and how the importance of having a track record and a history to be able to present to investors and to put some forecasting in place.
And that brings us to the end of the show. I am going to leave us with my favorite phrase from Sekai. Whether you're a female investor or a female entrepreneur, do not be afraid to challenge the status quo. That's all we have for today. Thank you for joining us. I'm Lanina Rasool. Goodbye.